Hello, my name is Frank Kameny, and this is Pride, Frank Kameny, Eyes on the Stars. And welcome tonight. Thank you for joining me. I have three key moments in my life that I would like to discuss tonight. These are moments where I feel I achieved most as an activist, and also moments of inspiration. I'll just say before I start that I always believe that homosexuals should wear a suit and a tie, especially if they're activists. I always felt it was important that we present ourselves to the community at large and the polity as hardworking professional citizens, as normal people. So anytime I picketed or did any of my activism, I was in a suit and a tie. So let's get started with the first moment I thought was significant. I got out of the United States Army at the end of World War II. In 1946, I had fought under General MacArthur, and I had then fought under General Eisenhower in northern Germany. And when I was released from the military in 1946, I went to Harvard University and got my PhD in astronomy. There, I met my mentor, Cecilia Payne-Kapashkin, and she was a wonderful inspiration to me because she was a woman in a man's field. She never let the fact that she did not belong, in most astronomers' view, in this field impact how she performed in the field. She was strong that way, and I found that a great inspiration. She is an outsider. Also, she looked at things differently, always looking at things differently. She posited that the sun was made up of helium and hydrogen, and up to then, all astronomers had said it was made up of the same elements as the Earth, but she said helium, hydrogen, which turned out, in fact, to be correct. She was a wonderful mentor and inspiration to me, and a grand person in my view. I wrote my PhD dissertation on variable stars. Now, variable stars are stars that we see on the Earth as having varying luminosity. They have a variable luminosity. What we receive seems to vary. And this is for two reasons. First, the intrinsic variable, which has to do with something inside the star, something intrinsic to the star, which dictates its change in luminosity, received luminosity. Also, extrinsic variables, which have to do with something that is between us and the star. So we perceive its change in luminosity, its change in brightness. It's because something is eclipsing it. And I found this a very moving way of thinking about my people, gay people, homosexuals, because I didn't want our brightness, our gay brightness, to be diminished by anything. Certainly not by extrinsic forces like oppression from police or the government or religion or psychiatry. But most importantly, I didn't want our brightness to be diminished by any intrinsic variables. In other words, I didn't want the oppression of the extrinsic world variables to make us hate ourselves. I didn't want us to loathe ourselves, to be afraid, to live in the closet, to live frightened of the world. I never wanted us to lose our brightness, and I knew that there were a lot of extrinsic variables buried down in us, oppression, and my big fear my whole career as an activist was that they would lead to intrinsic variables, the self-loathing and the fear that would diminish us ourselves. And that's what I found in the stars to inform my work as an activist. Self-loathing and oppression, the intrinsic and the extrinsic, which we needed to eschew. I graduated from Harvard University with my PhD, and I went to Arizona to do some more research. And then I traveled to San Francisco for a vacation. I was arrested there in the Greyhound bus terminal on 6th Street. I was caught having sex with a man. I was mortified. I was completely embarrassed. But I realized at the moment that it was happening that even though I was mortified, it was to do with the fact that I had been embarrassed in the middle of having sex with somebody else, that somebody else, a third party had come up and apprehended me. And that was my mortification. I was not ashamed. And I thought that that was a very important distinction because I did not think I was doing anything wrong. I believed in my heart of hearts, even at that moment, that I was not doing anything wrong, so I would not become ashamed. I would not let this extrinsic variable oppression lead to an intrinsic variable, an intrinsic shame. I would not let it do that. And I went to the police station. I had no shame. I got over my embarrassment. I talked to them about my booking for being caught having sex publicly as a homosexual. They said that it would be expunged from my record in 3 years, and I took solace in that. I then headed back to Washington, D.C., where I had a job teaching at Georgetown University. I was very excited about this job. It was my first job teaching as a professor of astronomy. And a year into that job, I was offered a position as astronomer at the US Army MAP service. And I was thrilled to have this job because, of course, this was the 50s. The space program had taken off. We were in a space race with the Soviets, and I was convinced that soon there'd be a manned space shot, men going into space, and I very much wanted to be the first astronomer to go into space. And this was the route, I realized, working as a civil servant for the Army and the MAP service as an astronomer, that I could be one of the first astronauts into space, a very exciting position for me. I was arrested in Lafayette Square, which is a park directly across the street from the White House, for having sex with a man. It was a famous 50s gay cruising spot directly across from the White House. And I was booked for this. And then I was fired from my job as a civil servant. In 1953, President Eisenhower had signed a bill that excluded homosexuals from serving in the government. And in 1953, when he signed it, I was so disappointed in him. I had served under him in northern Germany at the end of World War II, and I know that he knew that there were many, many homosexuals serving, fighting for freedom, and we fought and we won freedom for the world. And for him to then deny us that freedom that we had won in peace, I was so disappointed. He was such a hero to me as a man, as a leader, and to watch him do that, and then to have it visit me, and to find me losing the job that I dreamed of, was devastating. That was in 1958. I appealed that decision. Again, I felt no shame. I explained to my boss that I didn't think it was reasonable or made sense. He said that was the law. I was fired. I appealed that decision. I appealed it through several courts, and I finally wrote a petition to the United States Supreme Court to hear my case heard. That petition I wrote myself, even though I'm not an attorney. I wrote my own petition. I'd like to add that it was the first time that a petition had been written for a gay individual appealing a decision of a lower court, and it was unique in that regard. The petition was rejected. I was not reinstated into the civil servant. The Supreme Court did not hear that case, but it was the first time, and it set a precedent for gay activists in the future to take this kind of action. I decided at that time that I would become a full-time activist. My vocation was astronomy. I had studied that. I had done magnificently at Harvard, and I had gotten 2 prestigious jobs as an astronomer, and when they were taken away from me, I decided that I would not get another job for which I was not qualified. The job I was qualified for was being denied me, and therefore I would not seek another. I could no longer teach because I was homosexual. I could not serve in the government because I was a homosexual. I could not serve in the military because I was a homosexual. So I decided that my new job, my vocation now, would be as a gay activist. That would be my vocation, and that's what I determined. I would not take another job to support myself, and I was very lucky because So many people came forward to help me. I had supporters and friends. I slept on couches. People raised money for me, and they sustained me. And I was very fortunate to be a full-time gay activist once I decided absolutely that that was my vocation. I formed the Mattachine Society in Washington, D.C., and our first mission was to picket. We picketed in a lot of places, but on April 17th, 1965, we picketed the White House. Our signs were cardboard. They had very simple messages on them. We were told to keep walking in a circle. People came up to us and asked us questions, and we answered them, and we were available for information, but mostly we were picketing in a circle. And I thought this was very appropriate because right across the street, of course, was Lafayette Square, that gay cruising spot, right across from the White House. And there has always been close proximity between gays and the White House. So I thought it was fitting that here we were marching between the White House and Lafayette Square. We were also marching against the sodomy laws in Washington, D.C. The sodomy laws were finally overturned in 1993. It took 30 years to get rid of the sodomy laws in the city of Washington, D.C. My message here was very simple, related to my own employment, but we had many messages, and they all had to do about integration of homosexuals as citizens, as people who fought in the war, as people who were serious about being professionals and deserve the respect of professionals. Every year after that, we had an annual reminder picket to remind people that we were still there. This was also the time of the civil rights movement, and I was very moved by the work of Stokely Carmichael. I heard him speak, and I was so touched by a phrase that he came up with. He, working psychodynamically, inverted people's conceptions of what was wrong, right, good, and bad. Up until that time, white was considered good, black bad. Those were the color schemes, the color connotations. And so in a movie, the hero would be dressed in white, the villain in black. Stokely Carmichael came up with the phrase, "Black is beautiful." And I found that incredibly moving. And I love the way, as I say, it psychodynamically inverted the preconceptions about colors. I was inspired in that moment to come up with a phrase for gay people who were considered bad at the time. And the phrase I came up with, and this is what I'm proudest of as an activist, is gay is good. At the time, gay was considered bad, and I said, no, gay is good. And that's where my phrase came from, inspired by Stokely Carmichael, "Black is beautiful, gay is good." And I am most proud of that phrase because it summarized all my feelings about homosexuality and where it resided in the larger polity. Also thinking psychodynamically, I was inspired by Stokely Carmichael to think about psychiatry and how that was preventing us from moving forward. So that is the first moment in my life, the picketing, the coming up with the phrase, my birth as a gay activist, for which I was very successful, always, because I was supported by people and encouraged. And I always was looking beyond the next step. My second moment was something that I learned during the Second World War. Serving in northern Germany, I was part of Operation Grenade. Operation Grenade was General Eisenhower's plan to get across the Ruhr River into northern Germany and knock Germany out of the war in February of 1945. Now, in thinking about this campaign, I realized something that would inform my activism work later. The Ruhr River is a river about a quarter-mile wide, not that wide, but it is fed by 4 large dams, the Ruhr dams, that loom above the Ruhr River, and at that time were still held by the Germans. Now, at any moment, the Germans could blow the dams up and flood the Ruhr River, and it would suddenly become 4 times as wide, a rushing torrent moving at many more miles an hour in the current. It would be completely impassable to any attacking force. Now, this was known by the generals, by General Simpson, commander of the 9th Army, for which I was serving, but it had not been addressed. In November of 1944, the American First Army had attacked the Ruhr dams. They had not captured them. The Germans still had them. In December of 1944, the American Air Corps had bombed the dams, hoping to break the water early so that it would dissipate by the time the invasion would have to happen. They did not succeed in breaking them. So in February of 1945, when Operation Grenade was to be launched, the dams were still there. Potential danger, potential danger. And this is what I learned during World War II. First things first. Before we can solve the problems that are confronting us, the ones that were confronting me were, of course, with the civil service, the army, and education, not allowing homosexuals to participate. We had to solve first things first, the potential problem that was informing all the other problems, and those were the Ruhr dams during the Second World War. In 1970, it was the American Psychiatric Association. So in February of 1945, General Weaver, my immediate commander of the 8th Division, in which I was serving, had called the division together, and he told us, we will advance into Germany. We will cross the Ruhr River, and we will attack the Germans north of the Ruhr. We will surround the Ruhr, knock the Germans' industrial heart out of the war, and we will advance into Germany and knock Germany out of the war. This was in February of 1945, and Operation Grenade was underway. Now, I was in the 8th Infantry Division. Our division would be one of the lead units to attack across the Ruhr River. And it was very cold in northern Germany. It was freezing, it was snowing, sleet, rain, wind, very cold. We were awoken very early in the morning on February 9th, 1945. We took our rifles and we started heading down to the banks of the Ruhr River. On the banks, we would have to wait for our motorboat transport. We shouldered our rifles and tried to stay warm as we waited. The motorboats came towards us, and one pulled up in front of my squad. The coxswain kept revving the engine. We loaded on to the motorboat, and soon we were trudging across the Ruhr River. The coxswain was struggling with the current, although it wasn't that strong. It was still quite strong, and we had a quarter mile to go across the river. Before we got even halfway across the river, suddenly a tidal wave of water came downriver and hit the side of our motorboat. Water swelled into the boat, and we were almost swamped immediately, and the coxswain could barely control the boat. We were now halfway across, and the torrent was rushing on us. We were being hit repeatedly by huge waves. We were riding much higher. We found out later that the Germans had seen us advancing towards the riverbank. They saw us loading up, and they blew the dams, the Ruhr River dams, in anticipation of our assault. And millions of tons, millions of cubic feet of water came bursting out of the dams, flowed down the Ruhr River, and slammed into our assault boats. Suddenly, the river became 2 miles wide with a 10-mile-an-hour current at the center that the coxswain and the motorboat could not compete with. We were more than halfway across. The coxswain was trying to turn the boat back around to get back to the American side, but he was struggling against the current. The boat was filling up with water. We shouldered our rifles and started to bail. At that moment, the Germans unleashed a massive artillery barrage on the boats in the water. We were bailing. The boat was beginning to spin in the water, out of control. Explosions all around us. We were swamping. Our lieutenant was a college boy like all of us. He did not know what to do. He was silent. He was comatose with fear. Fortunately, we had a squad sergeant who was a career soldier, and he said to the coxswain, "Take us to the German side. Take us to the German side." The coxswain was afraid. He said, "Take us." And the two of them battled with the rudder as we headed towards the German side of the Ruhr River. More explosions. And then the motorboat ran aground on the German side of the river. And there was small arms fire at us. The sergeant told us to get out and run for the brush. The sergeant set up a perimeter in the brush to surround the boat to secure our position on the beachhead, and then he instructed us to return fire. He came around to each of us, told us to preserve ammunition, only fire at gunshots. We husbanded our ammunition. We stopped shaking and we held on. The sergeant came around and said, hang on till dark. Just hang on till dark. As dark set in, he relieved some of us so that we could go back and sleep by the boat and eat and catch our breath and overcome our fear. The sergeant kept us going into the nighttime. Finally, in the middle of the night, he came around to all of us. He reinforced the perimeter. We were all on the perimeter now. And he said we will hold on until just before sunup. Then we will get back on the motorboat and we will not try to cross the river. We can't do that now. It's 2 miles wide. The current is too strong. But we can let the river float us downstream away from the Germans. And eventually we will be behind British lines. We're behind our British allies' lines and we can go ashore there. Okay, just hang on and I'll give you the signal. He went back to the boat. He came back to us. He said, okay, load up. And in the dark, we made our way to the boat. We loaded up in the boat and he and the coxswain steered the boat out into the Roar River once again. And suddenly we were back in the flow of the Roar River as the sun was coming up, and the flow of the river caught us and whipped us around, and we had no control. The boat was spinning in the center of the river, but it was flowing downstream. Soon it was swamping again. We shouldered our rifles. We bailed. But the boat was swamping. It was swamping. The current was too strong. The coxswain could not get control. Finally, the sergeant said to us, we're going to go ashore on the German side again. We can't get across, and we will swamp if we keep trying to flow downriver. But once we get ashore, hunker down in the boat. Don't leave the boat. So he directed the coxswain to steer us towards the shore. He said we are going ashore near Venlo, the city of Venlo, the German city of Venlo. There was a bridge in Venlo. After dark, we will cross the bridge back to our lines. So the coxswain put the boat ashore. We hunkered down the boat on the banks of the Roar River, outside of the city of Venlo. We could see Germans moving all around us. We didn't notice the boat. It was quiet. The sergeant said, hang on till dark. It was very cold. We were shivering. But as darkness set in, the sergeant said, okay, get out of the boat. We were on the banks of the Roar. We shouldered our rifles, and the sergeant told us, march single file. Take off your helmets and put on your campaign hats. They'll look like German uniforms in the dark. Don't say anything. We're going to walk up to the approaches of the bridge, and we're going to go across the bridge amongst Germans. Just look forward. We started marching single file, and we're approaching the bridge, and there were German tanks in front of us. And then we were amongst the German tanks and other vehicles, surrounded by German soldiers. And then we turned and we were on the bridge. And all of the traffic was flowing towards the American lines, and it was all German. And we were walking across the bridge at Venlo in the dark. And then I heard in front of me the sergeant whistling. Was whistling Lily Marlene, which was the only German song that we all knew, and we all took up the whistling. The sergeant had realized that we were all marching with our mouths hanging open, and he wanted to give us something to do with our mouths. Also, he knew that if anybody thought about stopping us, why would they? They'd just be stopping a bunch of German soldiers whistling Lily Marlene. And then suddenly the line stopped. And I heard German voices in front of me. I clamped my mouth shut, and I heard the lieutenant's voice. It was the lieutenant. Suddenly he'd snapped out of his fear, out of his comatose state, and he was speaking German to a real German in front of us. He had had German in college, and he was talking to him. And it must have worked, because we started walking again. Soon we were off the bridge, marching on the road towards the woods. Then we were in the woods. And the sergeant said, now listen, we're going to walk along the German front line behind it. And we're going to find a breach in the line, an unoccupied part of the line. And then we're going to run individually across no man's land back to American lines. Don't do anything except what I tell you. All right, Lieutenant, lead the way. Keep it up with the German, Lieutenant. You're doing a great job. We stopped. Somebody was arguing with the lieutenant. We started moving again. We stopped. We started moving again. We stopped. We started moving again. And then the sergeant stopped us. He said, okay, now we're going to go across individually. Smith, we'll start with you. Kameny, you'll be next. Once you get across, once you get over the American lines, the Americans are going to want to shoot you because they're going to think you're German infiltrators. Throw your hands up and start talking about the New York Yankees. Anything you know about the New York Yankees. Give them some players. Give them who plays first base. And I said, I actually don't know anything about the New York Yankees. Kameny, you must know something or you're not American. Your life depends on this. Tell them anything about the New York Yankees, okay? Only then will they be convinced you're not German. Okay, Smith, go. And Smith ran across. And I'd be next. Kameny, go! And I ran across no man's land, away from the Germans. Running to the snow, running back to the American lines. Running faster. Couldn't believe how far away. And I kept going. And the snow made me slip. I kept going. And suddenly there was an American in front of me, pointing his gun at me. Mickey Mantle, Babe Ruth, the guy that Gary Cooper played in The Pride of the Yankees. I don't know much about baseball. I know about movies. I know about Judy Garland and Katharine Hepburn and Rita Hayworth. She's not one of my favorites. Yeah, she was in Gilda. She was in that movie Gilda. She sang that song, "Put the blame on Maine boys." Thank you, sir. Thank you. And I was back behind American lines. We'd done it. The sergeant, the lieutenant, all of us had done it. We'd gotten back safely to American lines. And it was 2 more weeks before the river returned to its usual width and the current stopped. The blowing up of the Rohr dams had delayed our action for 2 weeks. And General Weaver, our general, had his 4th heart attack. He had so much anxiety about what the Germans had done, and he was replaced as our divisional commander. And I realized that just as the Rohr dams, with all of their tons, their millions of cubic feet of water had prevented our crossing, slowed it down, psychiatry would perform the same role in my activism. Above us loomed psychiatry, this reservoir of hate, and we would have to address that first, or like the Rohr River, it would burst and wash us away. We must address psychiatry. I failed in my appeal to get my jobs back. And I knew now that I had to go back to first things first. I had to conquer psychiatry because psychiatry had determined that we were sick. And until we could convince psychiatry that we weren't, we would not be able to convince the rest of America. Which brings me to my 3rd moment. which had to do with my activism with respect to the American Psychiatric Association. You see, there were three forces against us in the American polity. Religion, which thought that we were immoral as homosexuals, the law, which said that we were illegal, and psychiatry, that said that we were sick. And in this instance, psychiatry was probably the most important, more important than religion or the law, because it was based on science. And in democracy, silence is sacrosanct. People really look to science for inspiration on how to think. And I demanded of the psychiatrists that they produce evidence that we were ill, that they show us proof that we were actually sick. Homosexuality was considered a pathology by psychiatry. Where was the proof? And I pointed out to psychiatrists that they had a very skewed sample of homosexuals. They only had the homosexuals who were not well-adjusted, the homosexuals who were angry, the homosexuals who wanted to change. And of course, that was great for psychiatry to say that homosexuals were mentally ill, because that fed psychiatry. They would have to come to psychiatrists to cure them, and that was money. The irony of all this, of course, was that Harry Stack Sullivan was the grandfather of American psychiatry, and he had put a psychiatric component onto the selective service examination during World War II. He felt that it was important that the United States Army be able to determine whether or not people were schizophrenic, psychotic, before they went off to fight, because if they did, they would crack under fire, and then they become wards of the state. The state would have to take care of them. And he determined that if there was a psychiatric component to the selective service examination, you could eliminate anybody who was psychologically unfit to be in combat, just as you would eliminate somebody who had a bad hip or a bad back, and they wouldn't become a dependent on the state. Unfortunately, in submitting his list of pathologies, he was prevailed upon to add to it homosexuality. And this is ironic because, of course, he was a homosexual. He had a lover his whole life named Jimmy, but he didn't want to be known as a homosexual. He was in the closet. He was afraid of losing his job. So he acquiesced, and he added homosexuality to the list of pathologies, which was then adopted by the American Psychiatric Association after the war. So we were termed sick. And this, of course, made gay people feel sick. If a psychiatrist says you're sick, he's a scientist, he's a doctor, you must be sick. And this contributed to gay people's intrinsic variable, that part of them that went to self-loathing, to self-destruction, and to want to change, to heal their sickness. My first volley was at the American Psychiatric Association, the APA's convention in 1970 in San Francisco. They were talking about homosexuality on the stage. I jumped up on the stage and I grabbed the microphone from the speaker and I said, "Stop talking about us and start talking with us." I felt like we weren't being included in the discussions, and that was not fair because there were many of us who were well-adjusted and had insights to offer. In 1971, I was paid a great compliment. The APA invited me to their next convention, and I would be a panelist on one of their panels, and the panel was called Lifestyles of the Non-Patient Homosexuals. And I was very flattered by this, and I thought that was a very appropriate title because, of course, I was not a patient of psychiatry, and so I was representative of the non-patient homosexuals. Also, I was no longer patient with all of this. I was impatient. I had lost my patience. So I thought it was perfect that I served on the panel of non-patient homosexuals because I was sick of it. Not in the sick sense, just I was tired of it. And in 1972, we created a booth which people could visit at the APA convention. The booth was called Gay, Proud, and Healthy. The homosexual community speaks. And we had pictures of happy gay couples. We had big red hearts. And we were there to show that gay people could be normal. They could be professional. They could be well-adjusted. They could be members of a society as fit psychologically as individuals. And it was a very popular booth. Many people talked to us. And Barbara Giddings, who started the Daughters of Bilitis, and I were asked to speak on a panel that year also. And we were panelists on the panel, Psychiatry, Friend or Foe of Homosexuality. And this was very interesting. We were very flattered to be on this panel, and Barbara and I met, an incredible activist, an inspiration to me. And we were talking, and I said, Barbara, there's a problem. We don't have a psychiatrist on this panel. And we had met many gay psychiatrists at these conventions, but we didn't have one of them on this panel. And Barbara and I started circulating, trying to find a gay psychiatrist who would serve on the panel, and it was almost impossible. Finally, Barbara did find one. She brought him to me, and he said, I will be on the panel, and I will talk, and I will present evidence, and I will make an appeal, but I must be disguised, and I must have something that alters my speaking voice, and a costume that hides my body type so that I don't lose my job. I was a psychiatrist at the convention in 1972 when I was approached by Barbara Giddings and Frank Kameny. I'm a gay psychiatrist, but I refused to speak unless I was disguised. I was very concerned that somebody would see me on stage and that I would lose my job. Frank Kameny arranged for a theatrical costumer to meet with me, and he said, you will wear a mask and you will be disguised. He was very reassuring. I trusted him. He said, we've got a mask for you, and you will wear a mask of Richard Nixon. Now, he was concerned that the psychiatrists at the APA convention might think that Richard Nixon was coming out of the closet and saying he was gay. So he insisted that I also wear a wig. Now he felt that nobody would imagine that Richard Nixon was coming out of the closet at the APA convention in 1972. Unfortunately, I couldn't see, so I insisted on wearing my glasses. But I felt that that would only add to the disguise and that people would be even less likely now to think that I was Richard Nixon. I went up on the rostrum and I'd been given a microphone that would alter my voice. Hello, my name is Dr. Anonymous, and I am here to speak on behalf of the gay psychiatrists who are members of the American Psychiatric Association at this convention. There are many of us here. Many of us have lost jobs because it's been found out that we were gay. And I have lost 2 jobs for this reason. The last job I lost, my boss said to me that he felt it was all right for there to be a camp psychiatrist at the clinic, a psychiatrist who acted campy, or for there to be a gay psychiatrist at the clinic, but I was both. He could not have a gay camp psychiatrist working at the clinic. Many of us have lost jobs because we're gay, and I have testimonies to read here of other gay psychiatrists. I have talked to many of the gay psychiatrists here, and we are determined to form our own group within the APA, which will be called the Gay PA. This is my statement. I am a homosexual. I am a psychiatrist. I am a proud member of the APA. For the hundreds of gay psychiatrists present, the Gay PA, only by ensuring that no one in a position of power is aware of our sexual preference or gender identity could we thrive in our profession. There are tremendous difficulties for gay people involved in trying to keep a coherent sense of health when merely by being gay, you are technically ill. The Gay PA must pull your courage up by the bootstraps, for we all have something to lose. We, as gay psychiatrists, must use our skills and wisdom to help heterosexuals and us grow to be comfortable with that little piece of humanity called homosexuality. Thank you. Well, I, of course, did not think this was a good idea. I had said as much to Barbara Giddings. I thought it was a very bad idea. I thought it was clownish. I thought it would make us look foolish. And I was very much against it. You can even see the picture of me at the panel. I'm sitting there at the table with Barbara on one side, on the other side is Dr. Anonymous, looking like Richard Nixon in a wig. And my expression is this. My eyebrows are up. I was appalled. But it was incredibly moving to look out at the audience as he spoke. All these psychiatrists, these incredibly learned men, and all I could see on their faces was tremendous sympathy. They saw what this pathology was doing to one of their own. It was making him appear in front of them completely disguised with a phony voice. And they were incredibly moved by this disguise, that he would have to appeal to them, buried in a disguise, and nobody else would even talk, even in a disguise. He was the only one, and he had to be so disguised, was incredibly effective. I could not have even imagined this. And this was a moment where all the pieces came together. And by following the instructions of the one person who was able to do it, something much more effective than we could ever have hoped for took place. The gay psychiatrists did form a group, the Gay PA. They became much more vocal. They began insisting that homosexuality be removed from the list of pathologies. And at the next APA convention in 1973, the Board of Trustees met. I am the president of the Board of Trustees of the American Psychiatric Association. In 1973, we had our meeting at the APA convention. I had produced a pamphlet which was distributed. I asked everybody at the trustees meeting to look at the pamphlet, and I said, I think this pamphlet proves conclusively that homosexuality is not a pathology, and I think it's incumbent upon us to remove it immediately from our list of pathologies. And if I am seconded, we will do so. And I was convinced that this is what had to happen. We were just about to do it. We did not take a vote. I felt like my evidence had argued the case adequately when suddenly there was an outcry from some of the trustees and a debate began. And it was an angry debate. People were very upset about this. They did not think it should be removed as a pathology. I said it will be removed because the evidence does not support that it is a sickness. We have to stop treating homosexuals as sick people. They are psychiatrists, they are potential government workers, teachers, people in the military. We have to stop preventing them from securing positions as healthy Americans. Well, many of the trustees did not agree with me. They demanded a vote. I said, well, then we'll have a vote. They said, no, none of the trustees. We want a vote of all of the members of the American Psychiatric Association. I agreed to this. And I was heartened to see that 58% of all of the psychiatrists at the convention agreed that homosexuality should be removed from the list of pathologies. And it was. And in a moment, 20 million homosexuals were cured. It was the most effective and fastest working vaccine in the history of mankind. Suddenly, we were all well and healthy with a stroke of a pen. And it was a moment of great joy for me because I saw that my early activism, my picketing, had come together with my knowledge earned in World War II about first things first, going back to the root cause. It had all come together with Dr. Anonymous and this moment of deliverance from sickness. No longer could principals and high school administrations rationalize firing school teachers because they were gay and sick. They were no longer sick. Laws discriminating against homosexuals in housing and employment were now unjustified. The American Psychological Association and the American Bar Association later in 1973 concurred with this decision. And finally, in 1978, President Jimmy Carter signed the Civil Service Reform Act, at which time homosexuality was removed as a justifiable cause for firing any civil servant. I was overwhelmed. Later, homosexuals were given security clearance in the Defense Department by President Clinton, and finally, ban on gays in the military was lifted by President Obama. I felt we'd done it. We'd done it because we had not given in to the extrinsic variables or the intrinsic variables. We had moved forward as healthy Americans who fought the war, fought against the government, fought against psychiatry, and earned our place in the American polity. And when I look today at gay pride parades, and how open people are, I am inspired anew. And I remember those days when all we were doing was picketing. But I do feel that that picketing, as we walked back and forth in front of the White House, between the White House and Lafayette Square, that gay cruising spot, that we were setting the groundwork for all of the protests that were to come. The Compton cafeteria riots in San Francisco, where the drag queens stood up to the police. The Stonewall riots in 1969, where once again the drag queens stood up to the police, and all of the rioting and protesting and parading that brought us where we are today. And I am so inspired to see big companies like Kaiser Permanente, United Airlines, the fire department with their own floats and music, and homosexuals filling those floats, singing. But I remind everyone that a parade can be as simple as a piece of cardboard with a simple slogan written on it to inspire anybody who sees you. And although I love the bar floats and the club floats and all of the wonderful floats that make up any gay pride parade today, I'm still so inspired by those lone people who walk down the street holding a simple sign. And I imagine they could be in front of the White House, demanding rights, and eventually, through strategy, through hard work, through determination, and a lot of loving support, achieving them. Happy Pride. Thank you very much. My name is John Fisher, and this has been Pride, Frank Kameny, Eyes on the Stars. Thank you so much for joining us. And as you know, Theater Rhinoceros has been presenting live productions throughout COVID-19. This is the 15th of this Central Services projects. And we've been doing full productions, readings. We have some more coming up. We have a after Pride party speed dating event with the wonderful Peaches Christ on Monday night. I hope you can join us for that. And if you'd like to make a donation to our theater in these incredibly complicated times, you can do so on our website, therhino.org. That's THERHINO.org. But more than anything, thank you so much for joining me for Pride, Frank Kameny, Eyes on the Stars. Good night.